Good evening. My name is Jim Kello. Welcome to NixTrainz, where mentors help modelers build. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Hope you enjoy the show. Hope you come back often and tell your friends about us. If you're new to the show, I hope that you'll go to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe to the site. You'll receive an email to your email address. If you'll confirm that email, then you are officially subscribed, and you'll receive all of the notices for our future meetings, as well as be available and eligible for our door prizes. Our door prize last week was won by Russell McClure, but unfortunately, Russell didn't claim the prize, so we didn't give the prize out last week. This week, we have another prize. This one's provided by Nick Santo, Decoder Buddies. And this consists of 3 items. One prize, 3 items. One of Nick's V18 has 12 lighting outputs and a 3-way stay alive. The second item is an original Decoder Buddy with 8 outputs. And the third is a mini with 4.1K resistor protected outputs and a 3-wire stay alive. It is extremely small. And we'll announce the winner toward the end of the show, as well as the special code the winner will have to include in his email to claim the prize. To be eligible for the prize, you have to be a subscriber to our website. And within 24 hours of the announcement of the person's name, that person has to send me an email to jimkello, numeric 1, @gmail.com. JIMKELLOW, numeric 1, @gmail.com. And in that email, it has to include the code that I will announce when I announce the winner after a little bit into the show. The email that you send me has to be the email address from you that you used as a subscriber to the show. That way we know that officially you're a subscriber and therefore eligible. And we know that you watch the show live or on the video later on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, NixTrainz Modeling. Therefore, you can claim the prize. Again, my email is jimkello1, numeric 1, @gmail.com. And you have to include both the email you subscribe to the site as the address it's coming from, and you have to include in the text of the email the code that'll be given when I announce the winner later in the show. So I wish everybody good luck, and I hope this time that we get a winner and can have Nick send out the 3 Decoder Buddies. We've got some great build-alongs coming up. The first one I want to talk about is September the 1st. This is Rick and Marie Hunter's 81-foot trestle. And it also has a discount from Al Collins of Ultimation if you are a build-along participant with Rick and Marie. By the way, all of the details about these and more information about the discounts available and how to order, and the fact that you have to mention NixTrainz in your order in order to get the discounts is on our website. And again, our website is NixTrainz Modeling. The next one will be on September the 22nd. This will be built by Martin Breckfield, MMR. He's building a Lebel Designs maintenance away car. And this really ought to be an interesting, you've seen Martin many times, scratch build models. Well, he's going to build this from a kit. The kit was his choice, and the manufacturer was his choice. Next is Jim Murphy on October the 13th. And this is going to be a Lebel business car in HO scale. Jim's a talented modeler, and this is the second time Lebel has participated in our build along. So I hope that you all will participate with this to show your thanks both to Jim for doing it and Lebel for offering the kit at a discount. By the way, the discount is 25%. Then on October the 16th, Bill Davis is coming back to build a rail scale model tobacco barn. This is in all scales, N, H, O, S, and O. And you all know Bill. He's been on the show before. This will be his second build along. The first one was of a Lebel passenger car. And then on November the 6th, Dave Schultz is going to build the All Nation waffle side boxcar. All Nation is coming back into the market, O-scale market, for the first time after many years. And we really appreciate, Dave, you volunteering to build the waffle side boxcar, and for All Nation's new owner to participate in the build along. This is a new company in effect that he's creating. The products are going to be new. They won't be like the old All Nation kits. These are going to be really something new and something special. And I think the waffle side boxcar is going to be just an example of what his production is going to be like. Then turn into our next My Build, which is September the 22nd, with Chris Corse moderating it. I hope everybody participates. We had a good turnout in August. I hope we have an even better turnout in September. I promote this as much as I possibly know how to do. And I can't thank you enough for participating and trying to show other modelers what is possible and what they can achieve if they just try. Trying is 90% of the game in model railroading, as far as I'm concerned. If you don't try, you'll never have a chance to succeed. If you do try, you can be successful. I guarantee you. It may take a while, but I guarantee if you try, you'll be successful. If you've got a modeling question of any kind, we've got a form on our website. All you have to do is fill it out and send it in. We'll be glad to try to answer your question or have somebody on the show answer it. Or as we've done several times now, have someone come on the show and actually demonstrate exactly how to do whatever the issue is that you're having with your modeling. So if you have a question, please let us know and we'll try to help you. When I announced Nick Santo was going to do the door prize, Nick said, listen, I think some people might be interested in some photos that I took when I was on a recent trip in Texas, and they're of the big boy. So Nick and I agreed that this was worth seeing. So Nick, if you could come and show us the big boy pictures that you have.
I can how to get off of mute. Here we go.
Okay.
Let's see.
Hold on, I gotta give him permission to share.
Thanks, Ken.
I just have to find you on my list.
Well, why don't we go ahead, Ken, while you're looking for that, and why don't we go ahead with Kieren, because I know he's got something that he has to do later. Our featured modeler is Kieren Haskell. He owns Haskell Company, Taiwan. He's very familiar with that part of the world, as well as model railroading, both from a modeler standpoint. He's a superior modeler, as well as a manufacturing standpoint. And his products, I think, are very, very impressive. And I think you will agree. I've invited him to come back another time to talk about the model railroad that he's building personally for himself in his home in Taiwan, as well as his company. But tonight he's going to talk about two model railroads that he was heavily involved with, if not in charge of, that are built in China. And I think this really ought to be interesting and a subject that you may not be familiar with and may not have heard a lot about. So Kieren, thank you so much for being here this evening, and I'll turn it over to you, sir. Cannot hear you, you're muted.
Thanks, Jim. You can hear me now, yeah? Okay. Let's see. Hopefully you can now see a quick overview of the layout that I headed up to build all in China. It's currently located in Shenzhen, next to Hong Kong. It was built in 4x8 or 240 by 120 centimeter pieces that were then transported and put back together in Shenzhen. We built it in Dongguan, the city next door. It was built over the space of about 2.5 years. It was certainly one of the more interesting and unusual things I've ever done. It's just one part of a large amusement park. Their timing was absolutely terrible because they were about to open when the whole virus thing came in China, which is why I didn't get there for the final opening. I was intended to be there, and the final finishing off. It was sort of 95, 98% done when I left, but for reasons that are probably fairly obvious, I've never gone back because travel is just a nightmare. Now, although I'm in no way, shape, or form German, it has a fairly Germanic feel. This is a reflection of the fact that the guy who we made it for had already bought a number of items in Germany that were Swiss, Austrian, German, whatever outline, particularly Fowler buildings and Roco trains. I would feel more comfortable building Taiwan or Australian outline because I think we all build what we know, or at least it's easier for us to build what we know. And my personal background is a sort of mix of Australia and Taiwan. The old saying about picture, maybe it's best that I start clicking through. Although I was there for about 2.5 years total, although it was built over about 2.5 years total, I was only there for about 9 months of that time. We started with absolutely none of the workers who worked under me having built a model railway of any sort before, or in fact any modeling experience. So they had tried to build a few things in the months preceding when I went there, but they didn't really get too far, to be honest. But my own background is that I'd also written the first Chinese language books about model trades, which is how the guy who we built this for managed to find me, or at least knew my name. Now, the layout was divided into a number of different sections. The budget, by my standards, would be huge, but that said, we all have our limits, and although you should be able to get some sense of the size now, but each one of those squares is about 4 square feet, or 120 centimeters by 120 centimeters. Sorry, 4 feet by 4 feet, not 4 square feet. So hopefully that'll give you some sense of the shape and the size of the layout. It was not designed to be so much a model railroad as a model world. Now, what do I mean by that? That the emphasis is not just on trains, but to have many different facets of the real life, albeit in a compressed form, on a layout, to try to keep people who are not necessarily train enthusiasts interested. So if mum and the kids were looking, we have plenty of things with buttons. Kids like to be able to press things. Now, whilst you can't see any barriers in these pictures, they were taken before the final setup for opening. There is, of course, a barrier around the layout. Otherwise, it would probably be destroyed within a day by kids. So that they could have some feel. I added a lot of things with buttons to activate things. This had two things that it can hopefully do. One, it tries to reduce the amount out of kids' eagerness to try and touch the layout, gives them something else to press. Second, it means things don't need to run when no one is there. I made plenty of mistakes in this build. I had never done anything on this scale. I'd done large scale builds of things, but they were nothing like this. For instance, I once did a G scale train setup for a restaurant in Beijing, but it was just a train track with trains that they would put the plates on the flat cars and small plates, and it would go around and people would take the food off the train. So really quite different. We made plenty of mistakes that whilst I built plenty of small layouts, you do encounter problems when you do something on a really large scale. The first of these was the base. At first glance, aluminium may look like a good choice of material. It is not, and I do not recommend it to anyone who's doing anything large, unless they have a very stable climate. Maybe if you're on the equator, if you're in Singapore, it's probably not a problem. Or if it's a smaller one, it's not a problem. But we found that because aluminium contracts and expands with temperature changes, the baseboards move more than the wood boards or the tracks. So you can get gaps. Think of it much like rails on a real rail, where you would have expansion gaps. Because the part of the world that's in, it can go from, in winter, maybe 0 degrees Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit, but the temperature at which water freezes, through to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, over 37 Celsius, quite easy in summer. But on paper, it sounded like a good idea at the start. We thought it was lighter, and it was still strong, be easier to move. I'm sure there are many things I miss here that I learned along the way, but stuck at the back of my brain still. Now, just to give you some idea of where we started, I've got two bridges here. The one on the right is one made of plastic card that the people who initially worked under me had built on their own before they found me. The one on the left is when we weathered a German, I think it was Belle product. Nothing complex. It's just black shoe polish with alcohol rubbing. We had to do a lot of modification of products that would perhaps be fine for home modelers but are not in a commercial setting for reasons of longevity or reliability for things that move. But for things that are immobile objects, most of the techniques we've used really are not particularly complex. I actually tried to keep them reasonably easy because of a lack of experience with the other people under me. I had to translate a lot of how we could do things. Part of my own personal background was in interpreting and translation. Anyway, but hopefully that just gives you some idea of where we started. They really had very little background. Again, now I've got two buildings that you can hopefully see up in front of us. It's actually one building, but it's a before and after shot of how we weathered it. Same technique as the bridge. they built some buildings themselves. We tried to rescue them. They ended up on less obvious parts of the layout for reasons that I think you'll appreciate. Now, we're lucky as English speakers, or also people who speak German or Japanese, maybe French, maybe Portuguese, to have a much broader experience base and availability of information. We can find out how to do things from magazines, from articles on the internet, programs like this, much more easily than you can in the Chinese language. There just is not, although China produces a lot of models, I think to become a really good modeler takes time and people helping you. They just don't have that circle there. It's only in recent years that I've seen more than one or two Chinese layouts that were good, at least in my opinion. There is a fairly large, quite well done layout in Shanghai now of similar size. The guys who did that run a model train shop in Shanghai, and I had done for some years before. Now, I've just shown here in the next photo on the left, when we started, I realized to start something huge with people who didn't really know what they were doing could actually create more problems than helping us get somewhere. So I decided we would build a small layout, which we did. And that's what you see on the left, albeit as a work in progress at the time. On the right, you'll see guys sitting on the boards. Again, we tried to do some of the simplest things earliest. Now, I think something that most people would understand is on a very large layout, it works to work from the back and work forward. But whilst we largely obeyed that, we didn't always, just because of where some of the simpler things were, and also that we could separate the boards. If we'd been able to not have to make the layout mobile, I think it would have been a much easier build. Just having to be able to take a layout apart means you've got to add a lot of complexity with wiring or something, that everything has to be separable. Now, the photos here, obviously there's a lack of trains. The car park on top, we use just cameras taking photographs of things like Stonewall, printing it out on big vinyl printers used for advertising, lighting, and commercial cars and figures to create an underground car park. Some of the, I'm just using a few random examples of different little scenes, vignettes, whatever you like to call it, from around the layout that are really designed to try and keep attention for those who are not so interested in model trains. We had a lot of moving features, which I haven't uploaded videos of here because I was worried if the connection was not great. But we started with Weissman, Emotion, Knock, etc. ones, but in most cases we ended up rebuilding them because I felt that the long-term reliability or longevity of the plastic parts would be insufficient. We also did a lot of animations of our own. I've got an example here on the top left is something that anyone could do quite easily and cheaply. It was a stand designed for jewelry. It's essentially a mirror that rotates at a slow speed. Could be purchased quite cheaply from the internet. I did a very quick misting of white and light blue paint, and although it perhaps doesn't come up that well in the photo, I think it does look like ice. We just use it as a rotating ice rink. Anyone could do that easily if they got the paint right. The bottom left, you'll see the shark, people on the beach. This one is not an animation that's moving, but just an example of what I meant by a scene that will attract people's attention, maybe make people laugh. Doesn't have anything to do with trains, but we will get to them later. The figures are all European figures. Whilst a lot of things are made in China, for things like figures, a lot of the best ones aren't. So actually the cost was fairly high because it was done to a high standard, and they're all imported for those things. Where we could, we tried to make as much as possible ourselves, wages being cheaper there. I was perhaps the only expensive worker on the project. Here you'll see some techniques that I think many modelers will be familiar with. Sorry. On the top right, the hedge is just foam that's been covered with flock, much like you would get from Woodland or similar brands, but we made our own. It's just foam that's been put in a blender with dye. The trees in the photo here, again, they're just, what do you call it? The things you use for cleaning in the kitchen, like for cleaning a cup or that, cut to shape, sprayed with glue and paint, well, paint sprayed with glue, and then flock or static brass put on them. Again, techniques that I think most modelers here are probably already familiar with. The gravel road or pathway, it's just sand. We painted it to change the color, but because we just couldn't find the right color there, it's just stuck on with white glue. The inverted U-shaped doorways on the hedges, again, it's just foam. We put thin bits of wire, well, not that, bits of wire through them, thin relative to that, to keep holding the shape, so they don't just change over time. Now, if you build a huge layout, you're going to have trouble getting at parts. This layout is about 4 meters or 14 feet high for the mountains. We built 2 working trolleys of different heights. They were just welded together with angle iron. They allow us to access pretty much anywhere on the layout, but this is not the way you want to work. You can see this guy there. I found if I work like that, I literally get a headache very quickly. So, like I said before, we tried to work from the center or from the highest point backwards to a large extent. Now, on the right, you'll see some pictures of a large mountain scene in the background. The guys standing up are already standing on boards, so they're already raised up. But the very highest sections we built on 4x8 pieces of wood and then put them in place. We had trains running on 3 levels. Oh, sorry, I'll just click on. Around the layout, we put in lighting as we went. We didn't count how many lights, but I'm sure it's many thousands. Thankfully, LEDs are cheap and quite reliable these days. We tried to use different lights. What do I mean by that? A different intensity. In the real world, some things have stronger lighting, some things have weaker lighting or more hidden. Also, yellow and white LEDs. So I think you can get a sense, for instance, on the right, the roundhouse is fairly well lit up to highlight the interior. So if people saw it in nighttime mode with the lights off, they'll be drawn to that. Now, the lights, even in the daytime, can have a function of grabbing your attention. The photograph on the left, you can see the lights on in the daytime mode are still noticeable. If you do ever build a huge layout, one of the first things I think you should do is install such wiring in place. We labeled every wire. So they're connecting to I'm not sure the word in English, the board that separates, where you have a number of wires off the one block. We sectioned these sometimes to quite large bits if it was, say, a mountain with only a few houses, or in other areas we needed quite a lot of them. But each is labeled, and we will put the U connectors on so you can just screw them in or out. To make it easy to replace something if something does go wrong. You never know when, could be a mouse got inside and ate the wiring. That happened with me with a restaurant train we did once, and it took forever to figure out where the problem was. I've just got a few more of the night scenes. For instance, the mine on the bottom right is actually perhaps best looked at night. I think night scenes in some way create a better image of our modeling, or can, in that you can easily hide your mistakes. You can emphasize what you want to emphasize. You can see now, some of these lighting effects were pre-made, not many, but you can see the Fowler bus stop on the right. We had a Fowler car system in place. To be honest, I'm not a huge fan about it in a commercial sense. I have started to build a layout for myself with an automated car system. What I used was, on my own layout, was a motorcycle chain with magnets, something vaguely similar to Magna Rail, or I believe Triang in the UK in the 1960s had a similar system where you have a rotating chain and the cars or vehicles are drawn around by the magnets without power in them. Whereas the fellow ones have batteries and follow a wire guide. But I found that having to charge the batteries and problems with mechanisms in a commercial setting, I have my doubts. But with a large layout like this, you actually don't need everything to work at once. People won't notice if something's not working so long as hundreds of other things are. We have 13 separated train tracks, like 13 trains, all with deliberately separated control. I realize a lot of people might think I should have used digital, or that I went analog, with separate controllers on them, albeit in some cases automated reversing. My rationale was, if we have a computer crash, if we have something like that, even if one stops, you're never going to have 13 stop at once. Now, if you look in the photograph here, on the left, you can see that we've got some carriages in the station, lights on. These carriages actually don't move, but we have other trains that come in and go out with lighting. Just the sorts of details, like people in the carriages, could be highlighted by the lighting. Again, the office block on the right, we've got the lights on. Even in the daytime, your attention will be drawn to the scenes where we've got the lights on, which are obviously the ones where we would put furniture, people, things like that. The boat on the bottom right is one that didn't move. Most of the boats on the layout do move, but this barge is in, how can I say, fixed in the water. We did at least still put lights in there. Sorry. Now, okay, this football field is perhaps a good example of what I meant by, I believe trying to vary the intensity of lighting can produce desirable effects. A football stadium is generally well lit up. So that's the most strongly lit part of that layout. Again, I personally like the feel of the nighttime scene more than the daytime, perhaps because it hides the not so perfect parts of our modeling. Unfortunately, a lot of the photos here were taken before the layout was completed. So we've got things like boxes of figures sitting around in the way. Clicking through to this mountain scene, these chairlifts are both from an Austrian company, Jagendorfer, but they're on separate boards so that they can be taken out and put in. We found that we had to do some things like add fishing wire lines to hold the supports in rigid place to get them to work very well, but it can be done. Obviously these move. They're there to have plenty of moving things on the layout. And the mountain scene, we didn't have as many. The buildings visible in the scene on the left are HO. Ones higher up are TT or as in 120 or N at the very top to give a false perspective. There's nothing we could do about the chairlift getting smaller as it went up. That would be desirable. I'd love to know how. Now, for buildings like this, obviously we built them before we put them in place. Some of the trees with snow were done in place. Some like just a misting of snow spray, like you would get at Christmas in some shops. It was all we used for that. It was difficult to find in China, but we did eventually. But much easier to build and put in place later when it's up in the air, literally. We did have a professional carpenter working with us. That was very useful. He'd never built a train layout before, but he could build solid boards quickly and had all the right tools. So you can see that the boards there are a little bit strange in that there are lots of supports. The reason for that is we have things like bridges going in there later, but then could wrap plaster cloth and foam and plaster cloth around those wood supports. They had to be strong enough to take the weight of people. Otherwise, most of well, I couldn't, I was the tallest guy there. We just couldn't reach things at the very top. At the very top of the mountain, nothing moves. It's just a static mountain model for the reason that we wouldn't be able to fix it easily. But hopefully the people in the photo give you some sense of the size. Remember, what they're standing on, even the guys on the right, is already a raised up board. So it's big. Okay, this is maybe more of an ego shot in that we've got two engines in there on the bridge that, on the left, that might give some sense of scale. Those are HO scale engines that we made for Australia. Not really that suitable for a German or Swiss outline. They run in the tropics on 3'6" gauge. But again, nothing special about the scenery techniques. It's basically foam, carved, plaster cloth, painted, bits of flock stuck on with white glue or spray glue. This was one of the other large scenes on the layout, the harbour scene. Most of the boats here have a mechanism to make them rock up and down, where we have a piston arrangement, much like on a steam engine or an internal combustion engine, turning, but in reverse. So we've got an electric motor turning, pushing them up and down at 4 points, quite slowly. Now, each motor is going to move at a slightly different speed. We had a slightly different voltage on each. This means that the boats will rock about in a not even fashion. It's something that you can not even notice at a glance, but it's the sort of thing that can hopefully hold people's attention for a bit longer. And really gets back to what I was saying about this is more a model world than a train world. Whilst there are plenty of trains in there, then they were not the main focus. I don't pretend for a second that it's a realistic world. It's, shall I say, an artistic interpretation. Some of these scenes, I'm really just putting the photos there for you to have a look at, get a vague idea of what we've done. Sometimes we could have what I'll call a happy mistake. In Chinese, we have a saying, turn a crisis into an opportunity. The water here, when we laid it, it looked like it had a kind of oily finish in some parts. But I realized putting it with the boats, actually an oil slick in a harbor is not an impossible thing and didn't seem that bad. Okay, on the right of this photo is an example of the mechanism we built. You can see that other than the motor, all the parts are metal. It was built to last. That they had to be able to run these have to be able to run 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for many months. Thankfully, we had a full-blown workshop because the guy who hired me to oversee the building of this layout, he had a factory of more than 200 workers that was making completely unrelated things, but he basically had a very good tool shop. And I built right on 5-inch gauge trains, so I had some background to working with those sort of tools. In the large photo on the left, I think is a good example of, whilst I'm not convinced that 3D printing is going to do everything in model trains the way some people seem to be thinking, I certainly think it has its place. I'm not sure what we call these things, those concrete things on, but they were all 3D printed because we didn't find a way to buy them. And then painted to hopefully look like concrete. I guess concrete barrier protection things. Now, a lot of the other things you can see in the photo are commercial items. Sometimes it's easier to buy than to build, or at least more cost effective if your time is valuable. So most of the buildings were bizarrely an exception of a few of the really big ones, just because we couldn't find such buildings, were kits. The boats, submarine, etc., all kits. Some of them had modification. You can see relatively easily at the front right, the small tugboat. It's got the plastic wrapping around. That's just to make sure it doesn't slip out of place because of the rocking mechanism. But in most cases, I weathered waves up that more. Perhaps a little less true in this case. Now, just another view. So I think we had about 8 boats in there that move. In the background, you can see the wind electric generator turbine things. Again, they've got motors in them. Again, they're European kits. We had an amusement park that started out all as European kits. Most of the mechanisms we revised. If it's plastic and it's going to be used 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, it will probably break. I like chain-based mechanisms or direct drive, but heavier chains like a motorbike chain or a bicycle chain. Again, another example of a little scene. What was on the layout was in some ways a little odd, in that the guy who got me to build it, he went and purchased a lot of items, but he really didn't know what he was doing with it. So he did things like buy them in 3 different scales, or just sort of bought them fairly randomly. For instance, we had a heap of churches, which is a little odd in that he's Taiwanese, but been in China so long that when I first heard him talk, I assumed he was from China, not Taiwan. But because his accent had changed so much. But we tried to use what we had rather than waste it. So with the multiple churches, we tried to put different scenes. In this case, obviously a funeral, but I've also got a wedding scene as a contrast on another one. Now, he did give me a fair bit of, well, quite a lot of leeway about what we built. At the same time, it was under his direction that it was more a model world than a model train focus. Okay, here we have a wedding scene. Behind on the right is a concert scene. In that photograph, the stage had not been installed. It has various LEDs that flash and move. We use sound effects that in some cases are linked to the buttons that kids can push. So we would have perhaps the wedding bells for the church, the concert, etc. Or for instance, I've got a guy that cuts down a tree, you've got noise linked to that. Sorry, let's move through. Again, some of these photographs were taken as works in progress. I didn't get to photograph the final thing myself. I do have some photos sent to me, but perhaps not exactly as I would have liked. This was one of the first parts we did, where I was trying to show them different ways of making things. Again, very much reliant on simple techniques and commercial parts mixed together because of the lack of experience of the other people working. And something on this scale, I just couldn't do it all myself. So something here, we have this now. Here the road markings were painted. But most of the other parts, like the cars, the figures, the buildings, are all commercial items. This way the scene could be created very quickly. So if you're in a hurry, but still want something different, just placement of commercial items can be a way to do that. Now, that's yet another example of this, the portable toilet, and people lined up. Oh, sorry. The grass in these pictures was, in some cases, sawdust that had been dyed, mixed with a few other bits and pieces, other crushed wood or leaves. Again, commercial fencing would have been weathered afterwards, but not at the time of the photo. More random scenes from around the layout. As I mentioned before, we've got a fellow car system in there. Just 2 seconds. I'll keep talking while I 2 seconds. Sorry about this disruption. But we've the beach scene, it's the same as the shark scene before, nothing moves there. The main roads had operating vehicles on them, all fallow. This is an example of what I was talking about before with the false perspective. The buildings in this are TT and N scale. At the back, the station in the foreground is HO. In modeling, we always have compromises. We're trying to create a vibe, a feel. If you think about the real scale of a large mountain, it is not the size that this is here. So what can we do? Obviously, false perspective is something that can help give that impression. Again, this is perhaps a somewhat idyllic world. That was partly down to the boss, the guy who paid for all this, the owner. He said to me once, some translation, so how do I say it? That the world's not so perfect. We shouldn't emphasize that. We should try and make people feel better with this. To be honest, if I was doing a layout myself, I'll probably have lots of weathering or graffiti or something. But he was okay with things like car crashes or the shark, so long as they're amusing. But it is perhaps a little clean compared to what I would normally do. Whilst I said the emphasis was not on trains, obviously we are not without trains. The backdrops, I have to admit, I had low expectations and I was wrong. The guys who painted them, and a woman, were professional painters, like artists, and they actually did a really good job. They were good people to work with. Because I think, personally, I prefer photo backdrops these days, but in this case, they managed to blend it well and not overpower the model scenes that we built, but just blend in well, and that really matters. If you've got a backdrop, you can blend well, it can add to the effect greatly. If you've got one that is perhaps to a much larger scale or something like that, it can, if anything, detract from the overall appearance of the layout, in my opinion. Now, just again, more scenes from around the layout. The large manor house, mansion, whatever we call it, with gardens, was something that the boss had been to the German famous layout near jwubbel. Had seen that and said he wanted something like that, but not a copy. We also didn't have a budget, anything vaguely, was as big as it was, nothing on the stratospheric level that the guys in Germany used. But this mansion here, it's 2 station kits that have been kit bashed. The maze is laser cut bits of foam that have been covered in static grass. Another mountain scene. The buildings in the background of this one, I think, are TT 1120 or 1100, if I remember correctly. The foreground, they're HO. The train is a model. It's actually one of our earliest models. The coaches are a very common type of train in Taiwan. Certainly wouldn't find it in Switzerland. They're 3'6". But I just happened to take a photo of one of our models up there. Now, in the next photo, We deliberately didn't locate it as one specific place in the world, but it does have a sort of Germanic vibe in some areas because of the buildings. So I did use German language signs in some cases because of that. But some bits like the subway, metro, underground, whatever you like to call it, station, could be anywhere in the world, really. That's scratch built. We basically just took photographs of, it's a work in progress at the time, but we basically just took photographs of things like wall tiles, used those with things like doorways for bathrooms, etc. Just another quick view of one of the corners. Obviously, we don't have the final coverings, masking at the front of the layout in these photographs, unfortunately, but it really was 95% done at that point. Again, you can see some of the large buildings in the background there were scratch built. They were really done more by the architectural modeling guys than myself. This was simply because we couldn't find such a structure available ready-made, and the boss wanted some skyscrapers. The site in the foreground has a number of operating things like cement truck turns around, guys welding, etc. Again, European Eismann, emotion, etc., with modification. Things like the building weathered. The fence, I think, is just thin, something like a soft drink, soda pop, whatever you like to call it, can type level of thickness of metal, painted, with supports added. So whilst we used a lot of commercial items, we did make some things. The fence behind, it's bits of masonite we covered with something called UV printing. It's not entirely flat. It's basically like a computer printer, but it's got a little bit more of a raised effect to it. You can see what I mean here by we're using European buildings, hence why we went with that look. We just bought a lot of those in advance. Like I said, not really my part of the world, not my first choice, but you use what you have. Okay, we're getting towards the end of this. It's a scene where you obviously have the lights, which I think for America, for the billboard, but I don't think most people in China would notice. The fountain, again, the lighting effect, more reliable than moving water. More churches, I think we touched on before. Again, some of the other things I touched on before, but with close-ups, like the parade in the street, again, it's just figures to create the effect that can just be glued down. Things like the street dividers, the pavements, sidewalks, whatever you like to call it, they were made by us. They weren't ready-placed items. Most of the markings on the roads there, likewise. In the case of the car park, we found it was easier to design them in Illustrator or Photoshop and print them out with all the lines and then just stick it down because just repetition, car park spaces. But again, in an underground car park, the lighting effect is really important. So we had some things like cars with lights, albeit ones that don't move. Anyway, that's a rough view of the layout. I'm going to perhaps stop this for now. Does anyone have any questions?
Kareem, let me ask you a question. Was that model supposedly to represent China or
No, no, no,
the
no, no, no,
world?
no. It's
Or the
nothing like
world.
China. It's nothing like China. I said to the boss, should we do China? But no, he thought that his customers would be more interested in seeing another country because they've already seen China. Second, it's a lot easier to build when you have kits and so on that are representative of what you're building. So what we did was essentially I'll say Germanic feel, meaning the German-speaking countries, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, because most of what he purchased had been purchased in Germany. He'd already purchased quite a lot when he found me. Now, if I had my own way, I would do either Taiwanese or Australian, because those are the two countries I've lived in longest, and thus have the greatest feel for. I think it's much easier to model what we have a feel for. Beyond that, I would probably be better off doing something else from the English-speaking world, like America or the UK, because of English. For China, it is relatively difficult to make a good model railroad because you do not have the availability of kits that are representative of buildings that you would see in China. Whilst there are some starting to become available, they're not really that good. They're not at the level that their trains are. They're mostly just plastic car that's been laser cut. And frankly, they're just not at the level of some American or European or British, whatever kits, Japanese, even Taiwanese. Now, that said, doing something Germanic, it's a lot easier than if I were to do African or Middle Eastern or something, because of the availability of products aimed at those markets. Yeah, but
Kieren, this is Greg. I have a question. When it's open, or if it's open now, how is it presented to the public? Do they buy tickets? Is it open during regular business hours, or how does that work?
It's one section of an amusement park. There are 9 different sections. So that I think the guy had one fundamentally good, simple idea. He said he wanted to create an amusement park with something for everyone, where they would have different sections that would appeal to different people, which would bring people back because they wouldn't be able to look at it all in one day. So we've got a section, the other 8 of the sections, I had nothing to do with making them. So there's a massive Lego display. They've got these massive dinosaurs that move and have sounds and that. They got a car section, so we've got a lot of die-cast cars and a few real ones. They've got a Barbie doll section. They've got a anyway. What are some of the others? I almost forgot. Some are actually built afterwards, but I think that was a fundamentally good idea. It's open to the public. I think the entry price is something in the order of 200 and something RMB, which I have to convert through 2 currencies. It's not cheap. It's maybe $30-something. It's in Shenzhen, which is right next to Hong Kong. It's turned out that it was probably a terrible business decision because they tried to open basically when the virus hit. When I was working there towards the end, I had an apartment that he provided me with that I was sharing with one of the other workers, and I'd left books, clothes, you name it there. I never went back. I left at the very end of December 2019. It was meant to open in February of 2020. It didn't. It opened about the middle of that year with severe restrictions on the number of people going through. Obviously, the guy who owns it had a lot of money. to begin with. I'm not sure if he still does have quite so much, because their rent was pretty horrendous. Maybe he got a rent reduction. I'm not sure. I haven't gone back. I'm probably never going to go back to China for various reasons. Perhaps best skipped over. But yeah, I think the fundamental idea of having something that appeals to many people, whilst we like models, it doesn't mean everyone does. Different people like different things. I think this is a great place that if you went there with your wife or daughters or something, there'll be something little interesting. That's probably a good way to do things. But yeah.
Grim, how many people did you have working on the model railroad?
It's a complicated question because it kept changing. We started with 3. At the most we ever had was about 30. I found that beyond about 10 to 12 became difficult because they lacked experience. I couldn't watch them all at once. Now, if they could be doing something simple, like just making flock with a blender, repetitive action, perhaps I could use a few more. But when we're actually building a layout, anything more than 10 or 12, too difficult to watch over when you don't have someone under you, because you had a very odd structure. We had the boss above me who didn't know about models, but he wasn't a dumb guy. We had the workers under me, no one in the middle, which normally you would perhaps have a second in charge of that. We didn't. We did manage to get a carpenter and an electrician who did help a lot. So I could give him a wiring diagram and could sort of follow. That did help. But in the other presentation I have, we have the Taiwan layer, which is a ride-on train. That was installed in the space of about a month. To do that, and it's actually physically bigger than the layout we just looked at. To do that, we had to have a lot of people through. We worked China-style hours the whole time, 8 a.m. till 9 p.m. 6 days a week, or well, till 6 p.m. on Saturday usually. So very long hours. I would normally say this would have been my dream job, but actually it really just felt like work some of the time, and it was pretty uncomfortable. In summer, we didn't have air conditioning, and sometimes you couldn't run fans. Say you were mixing plastic, you blow it around or flock or something like that. So it got ridiculously hot in summer, and in winter, if you're mixing things by hand, plaster or that big batches, it's about 0 degrees Celsius. It's cold. It's literally freezing.
I can't believe they didn't have air conditioning in there. Shenzhen is tropical.
Welcome to China clock saving. Yeah, it's tropical in summer, but it's actually in Dong. It was installed in Shenzhen. It's made in Dongguan. That's not that far apart. But I remember one time we had sorry, I can't get, someone can help me maybe for Fahrenheit, but 0 degrees, the temperature of water freezes at through to 5 degrees.
That's 32.
For 3 successive days. I was cold. Like coming from a mix of Australia, Singapore, tropical Taiwan. They're the 3 places I've lived in longest, other than China. But yeah, so like I said, it might sound whiny or whatever, but I think making a layout for someone else where you don't have complete control of your own desires and for a commercial setting is very different to doing what you want at home. We had time pressures. Obviously, we all have cost pressures, but also what the boss wanted pressures, which is how we ended up, for instance, doing Germanic outline rather than Taiwanese or Australian. Yeah,
And with the kind of management structure that you mentioned a minute ago, where in effect you had yourself and then workers and nobody in between kind of thing. How in the world did China become so proficient in building models?
In simple terms, Hong Kong. Most of the model trains you see that have made in China on them are made in Guangdong province in China. Guangdong is where Shenzhen and Dongguan are, right next to Hong Kong. It basically gradually moved across from Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong being a former British colony had far more people with a background in English. Whilst in the past, many people in Hong Kong were not proficient in Mandarin, the common language of mainland China, they do have a common language of Cantonese with Guangdong. There are very few there are not none, but there are very few Taiwanese-owned factories in China making model trains. There are more and more factories owned by mainland Chinese who just learned over time. Now, like any industry, they built up. They sort of took the simpler things across the border from Hong Kong in the late 1970s, early 1980s that were labor intensive, and it just grew from there. That said, as I touched on earlier on when most people were not here, Guangdong has been the epicenter of model train production for a few decades. But that is somewhat decreasing. When the virus came, many workers went back to their home provinces. Guangdong's one of, I think, the richest province in China. So they're very reliant on people coming from the inland poorer places to go and work in Guangdong. But what happened then was you had internal quarantine. So you would have to spend 2 or 3 weeks at each end each time you travel. A lot of people just didn't go back. I've talked to the guys and one of the females that I worked with in the location I was working at. A couple of them never left. A couple of them were from that end of the world. Many of them went back and just never came back. And that happened with a lot of factories, it's hardly unique to China to have had supply chain issues in the last year and a half. In fact, they started hitting China earlier, given that that's where the virus started. Of course, it was going to be affected earlier. But my personal take on it is that we're seeing a diversification of how and where model trains are produced. In my case, we've moved production to Taiwan. I started doing that about 5 years ago. I basically wanted to get out of China. I don't really want to live in China. But I also saw that there were potential political problems between the way the head of Chinese government was headed in the West and also demographic ones. They have a very strange demography driven by their one-child policy in the 1980s and 90s, which is now flowing through to a very low birth rate. People got used to having one kid. So you're going from 4 grandparents, 2 parents, 1 kid. In the long term, you're actually going to, it's not that long, you're going to have a falling population in China. What can we do then? Now, in some cases, I think automation is the key to production, but that can lead to reshoring, meaning moving production back to other places. In my case, the obvious choice was Taiwan. I say this as a dual citizen of Australia and Taiwan. I say this, how can I say, somewhat unhappily, but it's the truth. Australia, you can't make things, well, not easily. Taiwan, we have a good supply chain. If you want to make something, there's a good essay in economics called "You Can't Make a Pencil," because a pencil's a fairly simple thing, but meaning that to make anything, you need a supply chain. You need paint. To make a model train, you need paint. Maybe you need plastic pellets. Maybe you need a supplier of wire. Maybe you need motors. Maybe you need gears. You need machines to cut molds, etc. No one can make anything. The biggest factory I've ever been in model trains was Cater, about 12 years ago. I think they had about 7,000 people and they're down to 700 or something like that, a few hundred, like Bachmann and certain other brands were made there. They had 7,000 people. They were making their own motors, but they're still buying import parts. They're still buying paint. They're still buying plastic pellets. They're still buying wire. They're still buying LEDs. In a smaller factory, inevitably you are going to be buying far more parts. Now in China, we had a huge, and not just China, we had a huge supply chain collapse with the virus. And that affected everyone. Now, Taiwan, we were lucky. We had arguably the best management of the virus in the entire world. The government did really well. We've had no lockdown. We've had work's never stopped for us. We've had less than 1,000 deaths, and many of those are imported. So we didn't have such a supply chain collapse. So we can still go out and get molds done. We can still go out and buy paint. That said, I think every product of any size in the world now has something from another country, even if you don't know it. An obvious one would be on the models we make. We use KDs. They come from America. KD stopped work for a while. We couldn't get them. What do? All we could do was wait. That inevitably affected us. But that was happening on a massive scale across the world. And also you had shipping troubles. So we've seen, I think a lot of the Hong Kong guys in China that I know at least, they kind of want out of Guangdong. It doesn't seem to be heading in a good direction, but they don't really know where to go. Roco and Nok have moved a little bit of production to Vietnam. Some of the Japanese and at least one other Taiwanese company have moved production back to Taiwan, even though Taiwan is a far richer country than China. We think that mechanization and other efficiencies allow us to do things that maybe we're not cheaper, but hopefully we can make something that's better and more reliably, more stable production. Because right now the stability, or over the last year and a half, the stability has been something like a drunk guy on a tightrope.
What about India?
Interesting one. I think they've got a long way to go. It's a poor country. It's not, whilst China is a poor country, it is not as, it's a middle level country really these days. And India is not really at the level that China is at development wise yet. I'm not saying it can't happen. India has the advantage of English. They can learn more easily because of that. But at the moment, we don't have that supply chain. We don't have that cluster anywhere in India that I'm aware of that makes production easier. And even in China, we really have production centered on only just a handful of places. For more than 90% of the production is done in maybe less than 10% of the country. Guangdong and Jiangsu or Shanghai for plastic and die-cast models, and Anhui or Shandong for brass models. Those, we've covered 90% of what comes out of China. Now, the case of Guangdong, it was because of the Hong Kong guys. The case of Jiangsu, I'm not entirely sure about all cases. One I know was started by a guy who'd worked in Guangdong as an engineer fairly high up, and went back to his hometown and started a factory there, somewhere near Shanghai. But that's generally how these smaller companies are starting. That people, as we say in Chinese, jump into the sea, start their own company after having worked in factories for some years. There was a huge company called Sandaka, sometimes called Santa Town, by Cantonese pronunciation, which was eventually bought out by Cato, but at one time was the biggest producer of model trains in the world, even though most modelers had never heard of it. But all they did was outsource, and every second company was outsourcing. They were huge. And when they sort of collapsed, a lot of people who worked there left and went and tried to do their own thing. Some failed, some semi-succeeded, some succeeded. That's where you saw a lot of the production coming from in China. It was outsourcing recently. But whilst I believe it may get somewhat better in the short term, I'm somewhat bearish on China long term. I think the world never stops changing. It probably keeps changing faster. Whilst
What do you think? What do you think the American companies are going to do? Are they going to stay with China? Are they going to start moving their modeling production out of China?
You tell me. I outsource production, like I do outsource production for people for a few countries, but we're not really getting customers from America. Maybe just because we're not known. People from Taiwan or Australia find us very easy because we're a known name. Right now, I've got things in front of me that we're working on. This won't identify the model, but it's a headstock buffer beam, whatever you like to call it. We've been making for a HO engine. Sort of going, got to go and keep making later today. That's for a Taiwan model. I would say perhaps if I was to hazard a guess, and I'm guessing the future is always very risky, we'll see minimal short-term change with medium and long-term diversification. By that, I mean partially changing the techniques, partially it will continue to some extent in China, and that may depend on which direction the government in China moves. They seem to be being very aggressive to the world. And maybe some will move elsewhere. Now, can it move back to America? Probably difficult for a lot of things because you don't have a cluster effect as much and you have high costs. Could it be somewhere like Mexico? I don't know. I've never been there. Third places like Vietnam or Taiwan, yes. That I believe that somewhere like at the low end, somewhere like Vietnam will take on more. At the high end, Taiwan or Japan, it's possible. Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah.
But don't hold me to it.
You want to move on to your second video? We could talk about this.
Yes, just give me 10 seconds and I'll try and get that up. Sorry.
Anybody have any more questions while Green's working on the second video? Okay.
Sorry, just.
No problem.
Okay. Sorry, I've got to go back to Zoom and open it.
You see that share screen green? Okay.
Sorry, just move back.
Now, that yellow piece of paper on the left, it's a button.
Yep.
Click that.
Not what I want.
And then find the other slide you want to share.
Yeah. Sorry, 2 seconds. Share.
So go up to the top right where it says present near the yellow share and click the present. That, yeah, just right there.
Okay, sorry. Okay, this is in the same place, but at the same time it's quite different. This may be the largest gauge model train you've ever seen. You could ride on. It's like something out of a cartoon or a Disney book when I was a kid. It's meant to be a representation of Taiwan that you would ride around for about 5 minutes on the trains that you see. They're 5-inch gauge, which I think in America you would use 4 3/4, but it's really very close. And electrically powered, battery operated, but the batteries can last all day. I've got 2 65Ah batteries in each train and regen braking. Although it's Taiwanese outline, in China, the boss's idea was to let people feel like they were taking an overseas trip or something, a trip to Taiwan, which they can't all do for political reasons. We, even more than a normal layout, we're looking for a feel, a vibe, a representation. It cannot possibly be super tight modeling because we didn't have a lot of time and it's huge. Now, if you see on the road on the left, that building, that for instance was made in advance, it was 3D printed, but then with different bits painted and letters printed out and stuck on. The tunnel on the right was built inside. So we had a welded frame and just traditional model railroad techniques around it. So we used wire chicken coop mesh under the angle iron beams, then plaster cloth, then painting and flock. The track, the whole way around, you see a space on either side of about a meter or 3 foot. That was because of fire regulations. We were not allowed to build up to the edge. But again, like I said before, in Chinese we have the saying, turn a crisis into an opportunity. I think there was a good side in that if we didn't have that, we'd have too many kids grabbing at all the figures, the buildings, the whatever, and breaking everything. So perhaps it was a lucky problem. Now, this layout, again, the buildings you see here, they were built in advance. The backdrops on the wall were painted by the same professional painters as on the other layout. We did the HO layout first over a much longer period of time, and this was all installed in 1 month at the end, about 6 weeks at the end. That said, the preparation for it was really over a longer period, but nothing like the HO layout. Because we're trying to get the vibe of a whole country, albeit a fairly small one, Taiwan is about the same size as Maryland or Switzerland. You cannot do everything to scale. A mountain that is big on this is actually very small in real world, even if you used HO scale. So we look for an almost caricatured field, but certainly to be recognizable, that anyone Taiwanese would recognize places on it. Now, say, we did use some different techniques to model it. For instance, you can see the guy on the left is using a kind of electric or air-powered sanding rather than just cutting by hand or with a wire cutter, because it was faster with foam. On the right, we've got a guy welding for the structure, for the base structure of the tunnel. It was quite light, the materials we used, so it didn't have to be ridiculously strong. You can just see in the bottom left corner, we have a light and a switch control box. They're just on a remote control, something like you would have on your air conditioner or TV or something. You can press a button. They're electrically operated. They've got servo motors, sorts, big ones in there. Some of the buildings we see here, the big ones tend to be distinctive, famous Taiwanese buildings. The one in the center of this photo is called the Palace Museum in Taipei. If anyone's been to Taiwan, they may have heard of it. That said, say the buildings towards the left in front are just very generic buildings because we could laser cut them repeatedly. Now, the brickwork on the tunnel entrance, you can see it's just been foam cut, covered in plaster and painted, did an undercoat and black, then a sort of dry brushing of sorts, semi-dry. Much the same for the mountains. If you're really close up, to be honest, this is far from my best work ever, but it's viewed from a moving train. Now the tunnel, we also filled it out inside, but afterwards, so it's not visible. The track was just welded steel. We made it in Dongguan, where we made the HO layout and test put it together. Thankfully, the floor was absolutely flat. That makes a real difference. It's bolted in, but then we have ballast just for visual effect. In fact, it makes it louder, not quieter. But underneath, you can see there's a white bit. The white, it's just a sticker. The reason that's there is if it ever has to be removed, we figured it would be easier to pull it out because we used small stones that are usually used in aquariums. Very normal modeller's technique of white glue and water mixed together to hold the ballast together. So it's a purely visual ballast. It's not for effect. But you can see on the right, we've got guys who are carving off foam. Some of that was leftover from other bits. This was the section where I talked about, we had about 30 people working. I was there for over a month. We worked pretty constantly. It was a lot of pressure to finish this in 1 month, or just over 6 weeks, believe it. Some bits we sort of did, then looked at it and went, nah, that doesn't look right, got to change it. The tunnel is a good example. I realized that it was too flat at the top. We put the mountains with the snow caps at the top. And although Taiwan's a small and semi-tropical island, yes, we do have 4-kilometer, 2.6 mile high mountains that do get snow in winter. But we were able to add those from working from the other side because we hadn't done the scenery on the other side of the tunnel because no one who didn't work there would ever see it. Now, the track winds around, but we deliberately had a number of mountains like what you see here between them. One of the reasons for that is that Taiwan does have big mountains in the center of the island, but also that it separated the scenes. They were essentially our backdrops within the layout, if you can call it that. So it gives you more of a feel of traveling around. I'm welcome to be corrected and shown one, but I've never seen a model train layout that you could ride around on yourself before. But that's essentially what this is. Now, the buildings here, the one on the left is a famous Buddhist temple. The one on the right is a government-built building in Taipei, memorial building. They were built in advance with a mix of laser cutting and 3D printing for the most part. We did have some guys who were had background in architectural modeling helping on those. So there was actually a bit more help on this bit than on the first part. Both these sites are sites that anyone from Taiwan would recognize. At least I hope they would. If not, I've done a bad job. Again, on the left is another famous site in Taipei. The right, you get some sense of one of the other mountains' size and how we used offcuts in some cases to build up the shape effect. We found it was easier to just break and use offcuts, and then later we realized it was easier to just break up the foam, throw it down, than to cut it and carve. And that's what we used to get the effect of the mountain shape. Again, more work in progress shots because that can show you how a lot of this was done. This sort of almost White House-like building on the right is a museum in southern Taiwan, a privately owned one. Now, this is very much a work in progress. I know I'm biased, but it did look better when it was finished. I think we have a shot later. But we sort of had some bits where we printed out things like roads for placement, because otherwise, if you have access to a huge printer, if you can plan everything out and print it out, if you've got to do something in a hurry, just that placement made it a lot easier for the workers. And then they cut grass mats to place to fit the size. Again, yet another famous Buddhist monastery on the left, and the museum I referred to on the right. Just recognizable sites of Taiwan. Not really to scale, because if they were, some of them would be barely visible, others would be huge if it was the mountains. The mountain would have to be bigger than the real building, which was 6 floors high. The somewhat European-looking building on the right is a representation of a fort that was built in colonial rule. So yes, it does actually have Western origins. Again, you can see the foam. Obviously, we needed flat bits for the placement of buildings. In the front left, you can see we've carved out a road down, path down. But hopefully you can get a sense of the somewhat simple techniques that we used. That was partly because these guys didn't have experience, but that said, a lot of these guys had worked with me on the HO lab, so at least they had some idea what they were doing by that stage. And that we were working to a much lesser standard in our aims. The one on the right is a famous mountain in Taiwan, Alisa. The train there is just a printed out cardboard cutout that you really can't see as clearly probably when you're riding the train as you can in this photo. It's just a rough representation. It's roughly HON 30, because that train is 2'6" in the real world. The trees, we needed literally thousands of them. We found the most cost-effective way to do them was to buy very cheap, like a few US cents, plastic bases in China, and cover them in flock we'd made. That was our mass production technique. If we'd done it any other way, it would have just taken too long. Again, here you can see we're using grass mats, plaster cloth roads, ready-made trees, albeit bigger ones than these ones. When I say ready-made trees, they weren't completely ready-made. They're ready-made wood parts, the trunks. The hedges, we just cut on from foam on site. This is a tourist site represented in farm area, hence this castle that may look somewhat incongruous for an Asian country. But just to give a feel. Now, okay, maybe these pictures are a bit more interesting. The picture on the left is how we did grass patties in a hurry. It's fake grass, like you would see on a fake lawn, or park course or whatever, that we just sprayed yellow on the top to get the effect of rice growing, to being near ready to harvest. In some cases, we put fake water, like something similar to Woodland Scenic Water or that in there over it. On the right, the buildings, you get an example of what I meant by we couldn't work in one specific scale the whole way. The building on the left is 101 stories high, the tallest building in Taiwan. The building on the right, obviously, is not 101 stories tall. If we built it to the same scale, it would be barely noticeable. So we just went for eclectic or confused, depending on your perspective. We tend to have quite a few rather distinctive structures. Yes, Taiwan really does have a glass shoe-shaped building. These are because when you think of buildings in a place you're not familiar with, you don't think of a normal house. If you think of Australia, maybe you know the Opera House. If you think of New York, maybe you think of the Statue of Liberty, something like that. If you think, Washington, D.C., you think of the White House, whatever. You don't think of an ordinary house. So that's why the emphasis is more on these weird structures. To be honest, normally my own personal modeling, I like to model the ordinary. But that's not what this is designed for. This is to please other people. So in this picture, we see what I think was quite a good job of the backdrop painted on. Hopefully we didn't do too bad a job of blending. I think blending into a background is so important, as I mentioned before, for getting the feel. But the guys who painted it, they were really good, and they talked to us before. They looked at the colors we used. So we weren't getting a desert meeting a green field. The airport on the right, again, it was printed out with a large commercial advertising sign printer. The LED strips were used for the lighting. It's not meant to be a perfect, accurate representation of an airport. It's just meant to give a feel, a vibe. We do have some ordinary buildings. There's a lot of repetition in these. They were laser cut, then just done again and again and again, sometimes in different colors or that to hide the repetition. With plenty of signs, stickers, whatever, from famous Taiwanese brands, be it or recognizable signs. In some cases, not just shops, so things like post office, police station, Taiwan Health Electricity Bureau, Taiwan Health, some other government agencies, etc. But the style of the building combined with the signage hopefully would make it recognizable as Taiwan to any Taiwanese person, even though it is fairly simple modeling. It's not detailed, accurate modeling. The trains we made ourselves. Thankfully, I made a number of 5-inch gauge trains before. I always hope the best one I make is the next one. I think this was one of the better ones we've ever made because we learned from our past experience. Because we were running on very tight curves with 6 cars, fairly heavy train, we put 4 motors in them, but spread across. We have one truck or bogie, what we like to call it, in the first, second, third, and 5th car with a motor on it. The reason for that is if you have too much pull at the front, weight at the back, and light in the middle, you will derail in the corners, in the curves. So spreading the power out, it's just simple physics. It makes it less likely to derail. Whilst these are push-pull trains, we always run them in the direction away from the photographer. So if you see at the back of the train, you have a a raised seat. That is so the driver can sit at the back and watch the people riding the train. We don't really need to watch the route because after you've spent half a day driving it, you know it backwards. But you need to watch the people on it so you don't have a kid jumping off or something and rocking the train. Is far more important than watching the track in this case. So that's what the raised seat at the back is about. It's got, you might be able to see the controls in front of it. The electronics are basically made for a golf buggy. And that's basically the final effect. Hopefully happy kids and parents in some cases. Yeah, that's about it. If anyone's got any questions, welcome to ask.
Kieren, I can't thank you enough for sharing all of this with us tonight. It's fantastic, and it must have been a real experience being in charge of building both of those model railroads.
Yeah, Jim, it was certainly different. You could never argue with that. Whatever I made of it. And I'll probably never get a chance to do such a big layout again, but you never know. Anyway, thank you. I hope this was at least somewhat interesting to some people, and maybe we'll think about another presentation in a few months.
Absolutely. I hope we do. And I look forward to it because your models that you manufacture are fantastic. And I really do appreciate you taking the time tonight to share with us. And I look forward to seeing you come back.
Okay, you can say good night. I'll say good morning.
There you go. Thanks again. Have a good day.
Thanks, Jim. Bye.
Well, I got a quick question. The woman that lived in the glass shoe, I heard reports that when the kids moved out, she moved into a flat.
So what's your question?
Well, it was more of an observation.
Okay.
And the thing is that from my understanding, the parlance in British terms, a flat is an apartment.
It is.
And you know, it's also I can't think what they call the shoes that Americans call flats.
The shoes that American call.
Yeah, I can't either. So anyway, moving along. Thanks, Kieren. I really do appreciate you being here.
Most of you're doing
Nick,
loafers.
Loafers, gotcha.
So Nick Santo, I'd like you to come back if you can and share your big boy with us before we close out.
Okay, let's see if we can do that. Okay, you got a big boy there?
Yep.
This was in Houston, just to the dimes for scale and the AML stickers for scale. That was a fairly large locomotive. This was a very tough place to get pictures. The lighting was just not really nice, but you get an idea what the locomotive looks like up close and still. The final car up close and still also. I saw these trucks on the passenger cars and I thought of Jeremy. I don't think he's here tonight, but it certainly helped me appreciate the difference between all the trucks. Went down through and took pictures of each one. I'm sure he could tell me more than I can tell you, other than if I had to eat my lunch off of any one of them, I probably wouldn't have given it second thought. They're just very, very clean, very, very, just an absolutely incredible train. There's a few more of the locomotive itself. Schenectady, New York isn't very far from where I was born. Some of the gear, some of the complexity of that locomotive. just amazed me. Its size and its complexity was just absolutely amazing. This is coming into Orange, Texas. Lots of people to look at it. Of course, 4015 was chasing 4014. A couple of these pictures are some that I thought I was pretty lucky to get a hold of. They must have knew I was getting ready to go home. That's about the last picture I got. Got the big wave. That's the Orange Station. That was very nice restoration job they did on that. I know the people that did it and they're very proud of it, and they should be. Was beside the track, maybe a little bit too close, so don't tell anybody. You might be able to hear the thunderstorm going on in the back of this one. I should really move it out to about 40 seconds. Let me move it up here just a little bit. I learned quite a little bit about photography on this and what I wanted to do next time. It's a thunderstorm in the background.
Yeah, and the thunderstorm coming at you.
I was lucky. I stayed dry.
Couldn't hear any sound.
Just took a couple shots out of that group that I liked. Ed was kind of looking down at me.
Not deliberately.
Not deliberately. So that's those are the pictures I came back with from Texas. That was a good trip.
Well, Nick, thanks so much for sharing them with us. That's really interesting stuff. That's a huge locomotive.
It is huge. It was just amazing. I'm very glad I made the trip.
Well, thanks so much for sharing it.
You're welcome.
Well, now I'd like to announce the winner of Nick's door prize. And again, there's 3 separate modules of the Decoder Buddies, a WI8, has 12 lighting outputs and a 3-wire stay alive, an original Decoder Buddy with 8 outputs, and a mini with a 4.1K resistor, protected outputs, and a 3-way stay alive. But it's very, very small. And the winner of all of that great merchandise is James Drake, D-R-A-K-E. James Drake. And James, congratulations. If you're here, let us know. If you're not, you have 24 hours to send me an email to jimkello, numeric 1, @gmail.com. And in that email, you need to include the prize code. And the prize code is N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, B as in boy, D as in dog, 82. Let me repeat it. The prize code is N as in Nancy, S as in Sam, B as in boy, D as in dog, 82. And the winner is James Drake. Congratulations, James, and I look forward to hearing from you. And again, Nick, thank you so much for the door prize and for your participation this evening.
You're welcome.
Well, now I've got a few comments to make before we stop the show tonight and go our merry way. We try, and I think we produce some great shows. I don't think tonight was any. I certainly think it was an example of that. We concentrate on small manufacturers, many of which you may never have heard of before. We concentrate on talented modelers who can help other modelers either mentor or guide you in the art and the craft of model building. We try to have segments to answer your modeling questions, to spotlight local hobby shops that are trying to serve you, to offer build-alongs to you so that you can build models with the help and guidance of a talented modeler on the show. Plus, we negotiate with the manufacturers to give you a discount on the products used in the build-alongs to try to encourage you to participate and to actually build the model. This is close as we can get to providing you with a personal mentor. We also offer quick tips for improving your modeling. And guys, we'll offer other things if you would like them, if you'll just let us know what you would like to have us provide. We also have some great modelers doing the various modeling segments on the show. And I want to thank all of you for participating and for sharing your techniques and your knowledge. I think we have some great manufacturers volunteering to support our efforts and the shows. And I want to thank all of you for participating and for helping us. But we need more. We need more of both. So if you're interested in either being the modeler who does the building on the show or the manufacturer who is the featured model maker on the show, then please contact me and let me know what you're interested in building. You can pick the model, you can pick the manufacturer if you want to be the builder. If you're the manufacturer, you can build your own model, or we'll work with you to find a modeler that is talented and wants to build the model on the show. I'm open to anything that you'd like to build, anything that you'd like to share with us. I just need to know that you're interested in doing it. We can't just go back to the well, the same people all the time that are on the show. We need other people to volunteer that want to share their techniques and their modeling with all of us. I think we have a great team of volunteers. I think they produce some great shows, and I think that they are doing everything in their power to learn the techniques, to provide the knowledge, to produce the shows and to run the shows. But we need more. I've asked for volunteers, frankly, until I'm blue in the face. But we do need more volunteers. We need backup for the people that we have now. And we need other people so that we can expand and do some of the things that we're not able to do now, simply because we don't have the staff to do them. So we need volunteers very, very badly. If you're only watching this on YouTube, we need your help very, very much. We need to know what we need to do to improve the viewership on YouTube. We need to know how we can improve the capabilities that we are doing for editing and providing the breakouts of the shows on YouTube. So we need your knowledge about how to be a part of the YouTube team. Well, with all that said, and with, in my opinion, the success that we've had by keeping this show going now since May of 2020. This is the last show on Saturday that we'll be doing. We had to stop the Saturday shows for two reasons. One, marketing. The advice that I've been given, both by the marketing expert as well as by viewers, is we're just doing too many shows. You don't want to see that many shows. Why pick Wednesday to continue the show instead of the Saturday show? Because you told me that you wanted the weekends free to spend with your families and to do other things. And you'd prefer to have the show on Wednesday. That's why we're staying with the Wednesday show and eliminating the show right now on Saturday. And frankly, the second reason is we need volunteers. If we had more volunteers, then we could probably do more than we're able to do right now and make the shows even more interesting and therefore have a different viewership on Saturday than we normally do. But we don't have the volunteers, and frankly, we haven't been able to find the volunteers. I understand. Most of us are older, and we don't have the experience to volunteer, even if we wanted to. We don't understand the technology that's involved with Zoom and YouTube. I certainly don't. And we're not sure we want to learn. Learning how to produce the show and run the show is not difficult. We're willing to help you. We're willing to teach you. We have people that have volunteered to do nothing but help teach people the information they need in order to be able to work on the shows. But I understand the hesitancy. So it's not a question of necessarily you don't want to. It's just you don't know how to help us. Well, any help that you can provide us will be appreciated, I tell you that. And if you're thinking about it and would like to try to help us, the only way that we're going to be able to do more than the Wednesday show is if we find volunteers that want to work with us. So that's my plea to you tonight. This has been an awfully hard decision for me. While I've been writing the articles on New Tracks for almost 4 years now, starting this was because of the readers from the magazine encouraged me to do this on Zoom when the pandemic hit. And I've considered this really my baby. So stopping a part of my baby is very, very difficult for me. But based on your information, the advice of the marketing people, and frankly, the just lack of volunteer help, I don't think I had an option. We had to cut back the show. So we've cut it back to Wednesday evening. I hope that you understand why this was necessary. I hope you agree with the decision that we've made. I hope you'll continue to support us every Wednesday. And I look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. If we're not doing something you want us to do, please let me know. If we're doing something but not doing it well, please let me know. If you're unhappy with something that's going on, please let me know. The only way that we can improve the show and get you what you really want to see in this show is if you share with us that information. So I look forward to hearing from you. I encourage you to write me, call me, whatever. You just need to tell me where we need to go from here, because we're trying everything that we can think of to make this as valuable a time period for you as we possibly can. So thanks again for being here this evening. Look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, and happy modeling until then. Thanks again. And Ken, we're finished. And the picture that